The sound of crystal glasses touching should have felt like a celebration. Instead, it echoed in my chest like a warning. I remember standing there, watching the golden light bounce off polished silverware, listening to laughter that felt just slightly too loud, too forced. The restaurant was full, every seat taken, every table glowing under warm lights. This place, my place, had never looked more alive. And yet something about that evening felt off. "Mary," my husband Daniel said softly beside me, his voice thinner than it used to be. "You did this." I smiled at him, but my heart tightened. He looked tired. Not just the kind of tired you sleep off, but the kind that settles into your bones. The treatments had taken their toll, though he tried his best to hide it from everyone else. "We did this," I corrected him gently. But even as I said it, I knew the truth. He had always been the face, the charming host, the one people remembered. I had been everything else. The recipes, the suppliers, the hiring, the endless nights balancing books and fixing problems no one ever saw. 40 years. That's what it had taken to build this place into something people respected. And tonight was supposed to be about him stepping down. To Daniel, my son raised his glass from across the table. The man who built all of this from nothing. Applause followed. Smiles. Admiring looks. I kept mine steady, because I had heard that version of the story too many times. Then she stood up. Clara, my daughter-in-law. Tall, elegant, flawless in a way that always seemed just a little too calculated. Her smile was perfect, practiced, I realized now. "And to Mary," she said sweetly, lifting her glass. The room quieted. I should have known something was coming. "After so many years of supporting the business," she continued, her tone just shy of condescending, "it's finally time for you to rest. You've done enough." A few people shifted uncomfortably. My fingers tightened around my glass. "And," she added with a light laugh, "it's time to let the next generation take over. The new CEO is ready." Silence. Real silence. The kind that presses against your ears. I didn't need to look at anyone to know all eyes were on me. I did it anyway. My son avoided my gaze. Daniel's hand found mine under the table, his grip weak but urgent. "Clara," he said quietly, "this isn't." "Oh, come on," she interrupted, waving her hand. "Why pretend? Everyone knows this has been planned." Planned? That word echoed in my mind. Because I hadn't planned anything. "Monday is perfect," she went on smoothly. "We finalize everything, make it official, and move forward." Forward. As if I was something holding them back. I placed my glass down carefully before it slipped from my hand. "We'll discuss business matters at the office," I said calmly. My voice didn't betray me. Good. Because inside, something had already started shifting. The dinner resumed after that, but the warmth was gone. Conversations stumbled forward awkwardly. Laughter came too quickly, died too fast. And Clara? She acted like nothing had happened. Later, as dessert was served, my signature dark chocolate soufflé, the one that had once put us on the map, I watched her lean toward my son, whispering something in his ear. He frowned, then glanced at me. That was the moment I knew. This wasn't impulsive. This had been building for a long time. That night, the house felt colder than usual. I helped Daniel to bed, adjusted his blankets, made sure he took his medication. He tried to act normal, but I could see the worry in his eyes. "They've been talking," he said quietly once we were alone. "For months." I didn't pretend to misunderstand. "About replacing me?" I asked. He hesitated. "That's not how they see it." I gave a small, humorless smile. "Of course not. They think the business needs updating," he added. "Clara's been pushing that idea. Telling him you're too traditional." Traditional? I almost laughed. We had been sourcing locally before it became fashionable. We built our reputation on quality, while others cut corners. We survived recessions, supplier collapses, even a kitchen fire that nearly wiped us out. Traditional. Does he believe her? I asked. Daniel didn't answer right away. That was answer enough. He loves her, he finally said. I nodded slowly. Love had a way of blinding people. I'm sorry, he added. I reached for his hand. This isn't your fault. But I wasn't thinking about blame anymore. I was thinking about timing. After he fell asleep, I went to my office. The room was quiet, the only light coming from the small lamp on my desk. I opened the bottom drawer and pulled out an old notebook. Leather-bound, worn at the edges. Inside were my real records, not the ones anyone else saw. Recipes, yes, but also notes, contracts, contingency plans, agreements written and rewritten over decades, safeguards. Because you don't build something from nothing without learning to protect it. I flipped through the pages slowly, memories surfacing with each one. The first menu we ever created. The list of suppliers who had refused to work with me because I was a woman. The handwritten calculations from nights I barely slept, trying to make ends meet. This wasn't just a business. It was my life. And someone thought they could take it from me. I closed the notebook and stared out the window at the city lights. You should step aside. Clara's voice echoed in my head. I whispered the words aloud, testing them. No. The answer came easily. Too easily. Because the truth was, I had faced worse than her. Much worse. She just didn't know it yet. The next morning, I found my son already in the office. Papers spread out. Laptop open. Focused. Early start, I said, placing a cup of coffee beside him. He barely looked up. We're meeting with the bank later, he said. Need to review everything before Monday. We. That word again. And you didn't think to include me? I asked calmly. He sighed, finally meeting my eyes. Mom, you don't have to handle all of this anymore. I studied his face. My boy. But not a boy anymore. And not entirely on my side either. Who told you that? I asked. He hesitated, then said, Clara understands modern business. There it was. I nodded slowly. And you think I don't? That's not what I said. But it's what you believe. Silence stretched between us. I almost told him everything right then. Almost. But instinct stopped me. Not yet. Tell me something, I said instead. When was the last time Clara cooked anything? He frowned. What does that matter? I smiled faintly. Just curious. And I left him there, confused. That afternoon, I made a decision I never thought I would. I went into their room. Everything was spotless, organized, controlled, just like her. It didn't take long to find what I was looking for. A locked drawer. People who hide things always think locks are enough. They aren't. Inside, I found exactly what I feared. Business plans, new branding concepts, cost-cutting strategies. And then, the real blow. Emails. Between Clara and a competing restaurant group. Discussing acquisition. Selling. My stomach turned cold. She wasn't trying to run the business. She was trying to flip it. Sell everything we built. For profit. I closed the drawer carefully, locking it again as if nothing had happened. But everything had changed. That night, as I sat beside Daniel, watching him sleep, I understood something clearly. They thought I was finished. They thought I would step aside quietly. They thought wrong. Monday was coming. And so was I. The house had never felt so quiet, even though nothing about it had actually changed. The same walls, the same furniture, the same faint smell of roasted coffee beans that seemed permanently embedded in the kitchen, but something beneath it all had shifted. It wasn't grief yet. That would come later. This was something sharper. Awareness. The kind that settles in when you realize the people closest to you are no longer standing beside you, but quietly repositioning themselves across the table. I didn't sleep that night. Not really. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment from the dinner, every word Clara had said, every glance my son had avoided. By morning, I wasn't tired. I was clear. There's a difference. Exhaustion clouds your thinking. Clarity strips it down to what matters. And what mattered was this. They believed I didn't know. They believed I was behind, out of touch, sentimental. They believed they could move pieces on the board without me noticing. That mistake alone would cost them more than they understood. Daniel was still asleep when I got up, his breathing uneven but steady. I stood there for a moment longer than necessary, watching him, memorizing the small details, the way his hand rested on the blanket, the faint crease between his brows even in sleep. For decades, we had been partners in everything, even when the world only saw him. And now, when things were finally coming apart, he wasn't strong enough to stand in front of it with me. That didn't make me angry. It made me decisive. Downstairs, I made coffee the way I always did. Same mug, same routine. There's comfort in repetition, but that morning, it felt more like preparation. When Thomas walked in, he looked like he hadn't slept either. Good. That meant something was already bothering him. Doubt is a fragile thing. You don't force it, you let it grow. We need to finalize things before Monday, he said without greeting, grabbing a cup. There are still documents to review. I asked again, calmly. He didn't answer that part. Instead, he sat down and opened his laptop, as if the conversation was already over. That was new. He used to look at me when we talked. Now he looked past me, through me, like I was already becoming irrelevant. Did you know, I said, keeping my tone light, that your wife has been in contact with outside buyers? That got his attention. He looked up sharply. What? I took a slow sip of coffee, giving the moment just enough weight. Interesting, isn't it? The idea of planning a takeover and an exit at the same time. That doesn't make any sense, he said quickly. Too quickly. Why would she do that? Why do people usually do anything? I replied. Profit. Control. Security. He shook his head. No. You're misunderstanding something. Of course I was. That's what he needed to believe. I hope so, I said simply and stood up. Because if I'm not, then this isn't just about business decisions anymore. I left him sitting there, staring at his screen, but I could see it. The hesitation. The seed had been planted. Whether it grew or not would depend on what came next. The rest of the morning passed in a strange rhythm. Phone calls, emails, routine tasks that suddenly felt like they belonged to someone else's life. Staff checked in, suppliers confirmed deliveries, everything moving forward as if nothing was about to explode. That's the thing about businesses like mine, they don't stop just because something personal is falling apart. If anything, they demand more from you. Focus. Precision. Control. By the afternoon, I made another decision. If they were planning behind my back, I needed to know exactly how far it went. So I called our accountant. Not the one Thomas usually dealt with, the original one. The one who had been with me since the second location opened. The one who understood that loyalty wasn't something you could buy with a new title. I need a full report, I told him. Everything. Recent transfers, unusual activity, anything that doesn't match our standard patterns. There was a pause on the line. That's going to take some digging, he said carefully. Then dig, I replied. And don't mention this to anyone. He didn't ask questions after that. Good man. When I hung up, I felt something settle into place. Information. That was always the first step. You don't confront until you understand the full picture. Anything else is just reacting. And I don't react, I decide. That evening, Clara returned late. I heard her heels before I saw her, the sharp, confident rhythm echoing through the hallway. She walked into the kitchen like she owned it, like she had already stepped into a role that didn't belong to her yet. Long day, she said casually, pouring herself a glass of wine without asking if anyone else wanted one. I imagine it was, I replied. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. A lot to prepare. Transitions like this require planning. Transitions, I repeated. Yes, she said, taking a sip. You've done enough, Mary. You should be proud of that. There it was again. The soft dismissal wrapped in politeness. And what exactly do you think I've done? I asked, watching her carefully. She tilted her head slightly, as if considering how much honesty she could afford. You helped build something important, but businesses evolve. They need new leadership, new vision. And you think that's you? I know it is. Confidence. Or arrogance. Sometimes they look the same. And selling it? I asked quietly. Her hand froze for just a fraction of a second. Almost unnoticeable. Almost. I don't know what you mean, she said smoothly. Of course she didn't. I nodded slowly, as if accepting that answer. Then I'm sure Monday will be very interesting. For the first time, her expression shifted. Just slightly, but enough.
Good.
She wasn't as prepared as she thought. That night, Daniel woke up coughing. I sat with him for hours, helping him breathe, steadying him when his body refused to cooperate. In those moments, everything else faded. The business, Clara, the tension, it all became secondary. Because no matter what happened next, this was the reality I couldn't change. Promise me something, he said weakly once the coughing subsided. Anything. Don't let them take it. I looked at him, really looked at him. I won't, I said. And I meant it. The next morning the report came in, faster than expected. That alone told me it wasn't good. I sat in my office, reading through the numbers, the transactions, the patterns. At first glance, everything looked normal. But the deeper I went, the clearer it became. Small transfers. Carefully spaced. Just enough to avoid attention. But consistent. And all leading to one place. An account I didn't recognize. Except I did. Clara's. I leaned back in my chair, letting the realization settle. She hadn't just planned to take over. She had already started extracting value, preparing her exit, using my business as a stepping stone. For a moment, I closed my eyes. Not out of weakness, out of control. Because anger, if you let it take over too soon, ruins everything. When I opened them again, the path forward was clear. Monday wasn't going to be a discussion. It was going to be a reckoning. I gathered the documents, printed copies, organized everything neatly. Evidence matters. Not emotion. Not accusations. Proof. By the time I finished, there was a knock on the door. Thomas. He looked different, less certain. Mom, he said slowly. Can we talk? I gestured for him to come in. He hesitated before sitting down. I checked something you said, he admitted. About Clara. About outside contacts. And, he swallowed. I found emails. Not everything, but enough. I didn't react. Didn't say I told you so. This wasn't the moment for that. And what do you think? I asked instead. He looked at his hands. I don't know what to think. That was honest. Painfully honest. Then come to the meeting on Monday, I said. And listen carefully. He nodded. And for the first time since all of this started, I saw it clearly. He wasn't lost. Not yet. He was just standing at the wrong side of the table. That could still change. As he left, I turned back to the window, the city stretching out below. 3 days ago, they thought this was already over. They thought I would sign. Step aside. Disappear quietly. Now they were starting to realize something important. I wasn't going anywhere. And Monday was going to prove it. Sunday morning arrived without warning, as if time itself had decided to stop being polite. There was no slow build, no gentle transition from night to day, just a quiet, heavy stillness that pressed against everything. I woke before the sun, not because I had rested, but because something inside me refused to stay still any longer. The house felt different again, like it was holding its breath. I knew that feeling. I had felt it once before, years ago, the night before our second restaurant burned down. Silence before impact. Daniel's room was too quiet. That was the first thing I noticed. Not the kind of quiet that comes with sleep, but the kind that feels final. I walked in slowly, already knowing, already preparing myself for what I would see. He was lying exactly as I had left him, one hand resting on his chest, the other slightly curled at his side. His face looked peaceful, more peaceful than it had in weeks. For a moment, I just stood there, watching him, waiting for his chest to rise. It didn't. I didn't cry immediately. That's something people don't talk about. The way grief sometimes arrives late, like it needs permission. Instead, I moved forward, sat beside him, and took his hand. It was still warm. That almost made it worse. "I told you I'd handle it," I whispered. My voice sounded steady. Too steady. Thomas came in a few minutes later. I didn't hear him at first, but I felt the shift in the room when he stopped in the doorway. I turned slightly and saw his face change as understanding hit him. He rushed forward, calling out, shaking Daniel gently, as if that might undo what had already happened. Dad, come on." I looked away. That part wasn't mine to witness. Grief between a father and son is something sacred. I had my own to carry. Clara stood in the hallway, watching. Not crying. Not even pretending to. Just observing. That was the moment I stopped underestimating her completely. Because grief reveals people. And what it revealed in her wasn't just ambition, it was calculation without pause. Even now, she was thinking ahead. The next 24 hours passed in fragments. Calls were made. Arrangements discussed. People came and went, offering condolences, speaking in soft voices, as if volume alone could break something fragile. Thomas handled most of it, his voice strained but controlled. He stepped into the role naturally, the responsible son, the one taking charge. Clara stayed close to him, always just within reach, always whispering something. I didn't need to hear the words to understand their purpose. By evening, the house was full. Family, acquaintances, business contacts, people who had known Daniel in different ways, all gathered under one roof. Stories were shared. Laughter mixed awkwardly with grief. It was all expected, all appropriate, except for one thing. "We should move forward with the meeting," Clara said quietly to Thomas, though not quietly enough. I heard it. Of course I did. Thomas looked at her like he hadn't understood. "What?" "The meeting," she repeated. "We can't delay everything. There are deadlines. The company." "My father just died," he said, his voice sharp. She softened immediately, placing a hand on his arm. "I know. I'm just thinking about what he would have wanted. Stability. Continuity." I almost admired how smoothly she said it. Almost. But she was pushing too soon. And Thomas felt it. Good. "Not now," he said firmly. She didn't argue further. But I saw the flicker in her eyes. Annoyance. Impatience. That told me everything I needed to know. The funeral was set for Thursday. The days in between blurred together, each one carrying the same weight, the same hollow feeling that followed me from room to room. I found myself going through routines automatically, checking emails, answering calls, making decisions that felt both urgent and meaningless at the same time. Because the truth was, everything had changed, and yet everything was still moving forward. On Wednesday afternoon, I went into Daniel's study. I hadn't been in there since he passed. The air still held his scent, paper, ink, a faint trace of cologne he had worn for years. The desk was exactly as he had left it, neat but not sterile, organized in a way only he fully understood. I stood there for a moment, letting the silence settle around me. Then I opened the bottom drawer. The safe was still there, unlocked. Of course it was. Daniel had never been careless, but he had trusted me completely. Inside, I found what I already suspected would be there. Documents. A USB drive. Insurance, he had called it once. I sat down and opened the files. At first, it was just records. Financial data. Contracts. Internal reports. But as I went deeper, I realized what he had done. He had documented everything. Every major decision. Every contribution. Every moment where the public narrative didn't match the truth. Emails where he deferred to me. Notes acknowledging my role. Legal clarifications. It was all there. Proof. Not just of ownership, but of reality. And then I found the video file. I hesitated before opening it. Something about it felt final. But I clicked it anyway. Daniel appeared on the screen, sitting in this very room, looking weaker than I remembered, but still unmistakably himself. He adjusted the camera slightly, then leaned back. "If you're watching this," he began, "then I wasn't able to say everything in person." I felt my throat tighten. "I made a lot of mistakes," he continued. "Not in the business, not in what we built, but in how I let the world see it. I let them believe it was mine, that I was the one holding everything together." He paused, taking a slow breath. "That wasn't the truth. Mary built this. Every part of it. I just stood in front of it." I closed my eyes for a moment, not out of pain, out of recognition, because hearing it said out loud even now still mattered. "If anyone tries to take it from her," he went on, his voice firmer, "they're not just wrong. They're stealing something they don't understand." The video ended there. Simple. Direct. Enough. I sat there for a long time after it finished, staring at the blank screen. Then I nodded to myself. That was it. That was everything I needed. The next day, the funeral passed like a dream I couldn't fully wake from. People spoke. Memories were shared. Tears came and went in waves I couldn't control anymore. I stood beside Thomas, accepting condolences, listening to stories about Daniel I had heard 100 times before. Clara stayed close again. But this time, I watched her more carefully. Every word she said, every expression, every interaction. And I noticed something interesting. People weren't responding to her the way she expected. There was politeness, but not warmth. Respect, but not trust. She hadn't earned her place. And she didn't realize how much that mattered. That evening, after everyone had left, the house finally fell silent again. Thomas sat at the kitchen table, staring at nothing. I joined him quietly. "Are you okay?" I asked. He let out a slow breath. "I don't know." That was the most honest thing he could have said. "I keep thinking about what happens next," he admitted. "About the company. About everything." "And what do you think should happen?" I asked. He hesitated, then said, "I think I need to understand more." I studied him carefully. There it was. Not certainty. Not defiance. Curiosity. Doubt. Growth. "That's a good place to start," I said. He nodded slowly. "The meeting is still on Monday?" he asked. "Yes." He looked at me. Really looked this time. "I'll be there." "I know," I said. And for the first time, I believed it. After he went upstairs, I stayed in the kitchen a little longer, letting the quiet settle around me. 3 days ago, I thought I was preparing for a fight. Now I understood something else. This wasn't just about defending what I built. It was about revealing the truth. To Thomas. To Clara. To anyone who thought they understood how this story would end. I stood up, turned off the lights, and headed upstairs. Monday was no longer just a meeting. It was a line. And once we crossed it, nothing would ever be the same again. Monday arrived with a kind of clarity I hadn't felt in years. Not calm. Calm suggests ease, and there was nothing easy about that morning, but clarity. Every step, every decision, every word I would say had already settled into place. There's a moment before something irreversible happens when everything becomes very simple. This was that moment. I dressed carefully, not out of vanity, but intention. A dark navy suit, structured and precise. No softness. No hesitation. A single pair of pearl earrings Daniel had given me years ago. Not for sentiment, but for grounding. When you walk into a room where people expect you to surrender, appearance matters. Not for them. For you. The office building looked the same as always when I arrived. Staff moved as usual. Phones ringing. Quiet conversations at desks. The everyday rhythm of a business that had no idea it was about to witness something decisive. A few people glanced at me with sympathy. Word had spread, of course. Daniel's death wasn't just personal, it was professional news. But beneath the sympathy, I saw something else. Uncertainty. They didn't know who would be in charge after today. That, more than anything, told me how important this meeting really was. Sophia at reception stood up when she saw me. She had been with us for over 20 years, long enough to read a room without words. "They're already inside," she said quietly. "They?" I asked, though I already knew. "Thomas, Clara, and someone else." "Of course." I gave her a small nod and walked toward the conference room. The door was slightly open. Voices carried through just enough for me to hear. "We finalize everything today," Clara was saying. "There's no reason to delay. The paperwork is ready." "And my mother?" Thomas asked, his tone uncertain. "She'll understand," Clara replied smoothly. "This is the logical next step." Logical. That word again. I pushed the door open. The conversation stopped instantly. Thomas looked up first, relief and tension colliding on his face. Clara didn't move, but her posture shifted ever so slightly, alert now. And the third man in the room turned toward me with polite curiosity, already assessing. He was exactly what I expected. Clean suit, controlled expression. The kind of man who doesn't build things, he acquires them. "Good morning," I said, stepping inside as if nothing about the situation was unusual. "I see we've expanded the guest list." Clara smiled. Sharp. Controlled. "Mary, this is Adrian Cole. He represents a group interested in future partnerships." Partnerships. I set my briefcase on the table and took my seat at the head without asking permission. "How efficient," I replied. "Bringing in external parties before ownership has even been clarified." Thomas shifted in his chair. "Mom, we were just preparing to move forward." I finished for him. "Yes, I heard." Clara leaned forward slightly. "There's no need for tension. Everything is already structured. Once you sign, we can begin the transition immediately." There it was. So simple in her mind. So inevitable. I opened my briefcase slowly, deliberately. Not rushing. Not reacting. "Before anything is signed," I said, "there are a few things we need to review." Clara's smile didn't falter, but her eyes sharpened. "The documents have already been reviewed." "Not by me," I replied. That was enough to shift the energy in the room. Just slightly, but enough. At that moment, the door opened again, and our lawyer stepped in, carrying a folder. He nodded at me, then at the others, his expression professional but noticeably more serious than usual. "Shall we begin?" he asked. Clara gestured impatiently. "Yes, please. We're ready to finalize the transfer." He didn't sit immediately. Instead, he placed the folder on the table and looked at me. "Before we proceed with any transfer," he said carefully, "there is a matter that must be addressed first." Clara's fingers tapped lightly against the table. "This is about the will, isn't it?" "That's separate." "It isn't," he replied. Silence followed. The kind that builds pressure. He opened the folder. "Daniel updated his estate and business structure 3 months ago," he continued. "All legal documentation is complete and binding." Thomas frowned. "Why didn't I know about this?" I didn't answer. "Not yet." The lawyer adjusted his glasses and continued. "The company remains under the full ownership and control of Mary." Clara blinked. "Once." That was all. But it was enough. "That's not correct," she said quickly. "We discussed a transition." "You discussed it," I said calmly. "Not finalized it." Thomas looked between us, confusion deepening. "Mom, what does this mean?" "It means," I said, meeting his eyes, "that nothing changes today unless I decide it does." Clara's composure cracked. Not completely, but enough to show the strain underneath. "This is ridiculous. Daniel would never." "Daniel did exactly what he believed was right," I interrupted, my voice steady. "And he made sure it was documented." The lawyer slid a paper across the table. Clara didn't touch it. Thomas did. I watched his face as he read. Shock. Then realization. Then something heavier. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked quietly. Because you weren't ready to hear it, I replied. That landed harder than anything else I had said. Clara leaned forward again, more forcefully this time. This doesn't change the fact that the company needs new leadership. You can't hold on to control forever. I smiled slightly, not because it was amusing, because it was predictable. You're right, I said. I can't hold on to it forever. For a brief moment, she thought she had won something. I let that moment exist. Then I opened my folder. And neither can you, I added. I slid the documents across the table. Emails, transactions, evidence, not accusations, proof. Thomas picked them up first. Clara didn't move. Not yet. What is this? He asked. Something you should have seen earlier, I said. He read in silence. And as he did, the room changed. You could feel it, like air leaving a sealed space. Clara, he said slowly. What is this? She reached for his hand. He pulled it away. It's not what it looks like, she said quickly. These are just exploratory. Financial transfers? He cut in, his voice no longer uncertain. To your account? Silence. That was the moment. The exact moment everything broke. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just completely. I leaned back slightly, watching it unfold. Not interfering. Not adding anything. Because truth doesn't need help once it's exposed. The man from the other company stood up quietly. I think this is no longer my place to be involved. Correct, I said without looking at him. He left without another word. Clara's control was gone now. Not entirely, but enough that she couldn't pretend anymore. This is manipulation, she said, her voice tightening. You're turning him against me. No, Thomas said, finally looking at her clearly. You did that yourself. That was the end of it. Not officially, not legally, but emotionally. And that's what mattered. I closed my folder. This meeting is over, I said. No one argued. No one needed to, because the outcome was already clear. As we stood, Thomas didn't follow Clara. He stayed. That was the only confirmation I needed. When I walked out of that room, nothing about the building had changed. But everything about the future had. They thought they were walking into a signing. Instead, they walked into the truth. And the truth doesn't negotiate. Silence has a different meaning after everything collapses. It's no longer anticipation or tension, it's aftermath. That's what the days after the meeting felt like. Not victory. Not relief. Just the quiet echo of something that had finally broken beyond repair. The office returned to its routine almost immediately, as if nothing had happened, but I could see it in the way people looked at me now. Not with sympathy. Not even with uncertainty. With understanding. They knew who had been holding everything together all along, even if they couldn't have said it out loud before. Thomas didn't come home that night. I didn't call him. Some distances need to be walked alone, and this was one of them. Betrayal isn't something you process in a conversation. It settles into you slowly, reshaping how you see everything that came before it. I knew he was somewhere between anger and denial, trying to piece together a version of reality that made sense. The problem was the truth rarely does that. It doesn't comfort you. It forces you to adjust. Clara, on the other hand, didn't disappear quietly. I expected that. People like her don't retreat, they recalibrate. By the next morning, I had already received a formal notice from her lawyer, disputing everything, questioning ownership, claiming involvement, contribution, entitlement. It was almost impressive how quickly she moved from exposure to defense. Almost. But it didn't concern me. Not really. Because everything she was building her argument on had already been dismantled before she even began. I sat in my office reviewing the documents again, not because I needed to, but because repetition reinforces certainty. Every transfer, every email, every decision she made thinking no one was watching. It was all there, clean, undeniable. She hadn't just underestimated me, she had overestimated herself. That's always the more dangerous mistake. By midday, The staff had fully caught on. Not through announcements or meetings, but through observation. Restaurants run on instinct as much as structure. People feel shifts before they're told about them. Marcel came into my office without knocking, something he hadn't done in years unless it mattered. "So," he said, crossing his arms, "it is finished?" I looked up at him. "It's resolved." He nodded slowly, studying my face. "And your son?" "Learning," I replied. That seemed to satisfy him. Marcel understood something many people didn't. Growth doesn't always look like progress at first. Sometimes it looks like collapse. That afternoon, I went down to the kitchen. Not because I had to, but because I wanted to. There's something grounding about being in the middle of controlled chaos. The rhythm of knives, the heat, the movement, the unspoken coordination between people who know exactly what they're doing. It reminded me of the early days, when everything depended on precision and nothing could be taken for granted. For a moment, I just stood there, watching. Then I stepped in. "Move," I said quietly, taking over one of the stations. No one questioned it. No one needed to. The first dish I prepared was simple. Deliberately so. Not about complexity, about control. Every movement exact. Every ingredient placed with purpose. That's what Clara never understood. This business wasn't about appearances or strategies written on paper. It was about execution, consistency, discipline. You couldn't fake that. Not for long. "Still perfect," Marcel muttered after tasting it. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. By the time I went back upstairs, something inside me had settled again. Not completely, but enough. That evening, Thomas came home. He looked different. Not broken. Not defeated. Just altered. He stood in the doorway for a moment before speaking. "Can we talk?" I gestured toward the kitchen. He sat across from me, just like he had a few nights before. But this time, he didn't avoid my eyes. "I ended it," he said. I didn't ask what he meant. "I filed for divorce," he added. I nodded once. "That was fast," I said. He let out a short, humorless laugh. "It wasn't fast. It just felt like it, because I wasn't paying attention before." That was honest. Painfully so. "I kept thinking there was some explanation," he continued. "Some way to make it make sense. But there isn't. She planned everything. Even before Dad got worse." I watched him carefully. This wasn't just about Clara anymore. This was about him understanding his own role in what happened. "And you?" I asked quietly. He frowned slightly. "What about me?" "What did you ignore?" I asked. He leaned back, exhaling slowly. "A lot." That was the right answer. "I wanted things to be easier," he admitted. "Cleaner. More modern. I thought maybe you were holding on to things too tightly. That maybe it was time." I let that sit for a moment. "Was it?" I asked. He shook his head. "No. Simple. Clear. Earned." "I didn't understand what it took to build all of this," he said. "I thought I did, but I didn't." I nodded. That was the first real step. Understanding the difference between inheriting something and earning it. "I want to learn," he said finally. "Properly. From the ground up." There it was. Not entitlement. Not expectation. Request. That mattered. "You'll start in the kitchen," I said. He blinked. "The kitchen?" "Yes. I went to business school." "And now you'll learn the business," I interrupted. He hesitated, then nodded. "Okay." That was it. No argument. No negotiation. Good. Because this wasn't a compromise. This was a reset. The next few weeks moved quickly. Legal processes began, slowed, then accelerated again. Clara fought everything, as expected, but the foundation of her position was too weak. Every claim she made was countered by evidence she couldn't explain. Eventually, the tone of her lawyer's letters changed from aggressive to strategic. That's how you know someone is losing. They stop trying to win and start trying to minimize damage. Thomas kept his word. Every morning, he was in the kitchen. Early.
silent.
observing. At first, the staff treated him carefully, unsure how to react. But kitchens don't tolerate uncertainty for long. Either you keep up or you get out of the way. He learned quickly. Not because it was easy, but because he finally understood that it wasn't supposed to be. One evening, I watched him from the doorway as he plated a dish. His movements weren't perfect yet, but they were intentional, focused. Marcel stood beside him, arms crossed, saying nothing. That meant approval. I stepped inside. "Try it again," I said. Thomas looked up. "What's wrong with it?" I didn't answer. I didn't need to. He looked at the plate again, adjusted something, then tried again. Better. Not perfect, but better. That was enough for now. Later that night, after the restaurant had closed and the staff had gone home, I sat alone in the dining room. The lights were dimmed, the space quiet, the kind of quiet that feels earned rather than empty. For the first time in weeks, I allowed myself to feel it, not just the loss, but the shift. Everything had changed. Not in the way Clara wanted, but in the way it needed to. The business was still mine.
But more importantly, it was still intact.
Untouched. Uncompromised. And for the first time since all of this started, I wasn't thinking about defending it anymore. I was thinking about what came next. Because protecting something is only part of the story. The rest is knowing when and how to pass it on. I looked around the room, at the tables, the details, the space that had held 4 decades of work, sacrifice, and decisions no one else ever saw. Then I stood up, straightened my jacket, and turned off the lights. Tomorrow wasn't about survival anymore. It was about building again. And this time there would be no confusion about who was doing the building. Time doesn't stop after everything changes. That's one of the hardest truths to accept. You expect some kind of pause, a moment where the world acknowledges what you've been through, but it doesn't come. The doors still open. The staff still arrive. The orders still go out. Life continues, whether you're ready or not. And somewhere in that continuation, you either fall behind or you step forward. A month passed faster than I expected. Not because it was easy, but because it was full. Full of decisions, adjustments, quiet corrections that no one noticed, but everyone felt. The kind of work I had always done. The kind of work that keeps something alive without drawing attention to itself. The restaurant didn't just survive.
It sharpened.
There's something that happens when uncertainty disappears. People settle. Focus returns. Standards rise without needing to be enforced. The staff moved differently now, more confident, more aligned. Not because anything dramatic had changed, but because clarity had replaced doubt. And clarity is powerful. Thomas changed too. Not overnight. Not in some dramatic transformation. But steadily.
Consistently.
The kind of change you only notice if you've been watching from the beginning. He stopped asking for approval and started asking better questions. He stopped trying to prove himself and started trying to understand. That's the difference between someone who wants control and someone who wants responsibility. One evening, I stood near the kitchen entrance again, watching him work.
He didn't notice me this time.
That was new. He was focused, completely absorbed in what he was doing, moving with intention instead of hesitation. The dish in front of him wasn't complicated, but it didn't need to be. Precision had replaced ambition. That's always the right order. Marcel stood nearby, pretending not to watch. Also knew. When Thomas finished plating, he paused for a second longer than necessary, studying the result. Not for perfection, but for consistency. Then he nodded slightly, as if answering a question only he could hear. I stepped forward.
"Serve it," I said.
He turned, surprised, then relaxed when he saw me. "It's not ready." "It's ready enough," I replied. He hesitated, then nodded, and sent it out. That moment mattered more than he realized. Because knowing when something is ready, not perfect, is one of the hardest lessons in this business. Maybe in any business. Later that night, after service ended and the kitchen began to quiet down, he came to find me. "I think I understand something," he said. I raised an eyebrow. "Only one thing?" He smiled slightly. More than one. But this one matters. I waited. This place isn't just about food, he said. It's about trust. Every person here trusts that the standard won't drop, that what we serve means something. I nodded. And if that breaks, he continued, everything else follows. Exactly, I said. He leaned against the counter, thinking. I almost broke that. I didn't soften the truth. Yes, I said. He accepted it. That mattered too.
But you didn't, I added.
He looked up.
Because you stopped, I said.
And you learned. That was the difference. Not perfection. Correction. We stood there in silence for a moment, the kind that doesn't need to be filled. Then he asked the question I knew was coming. When will I be ready? I didn't answer immediately. Not because I didn't know, but because timing matters, even in answers. When you stop asking that question, I said finally. He frowned slightly, then nodded. He understood. Not completely, but enough. The legal situation with Clara resolved itself quietly. That's how most things end when the foundation is gone. Not with a dramatic conclusion, but with a slow withdrawal. Claims were reduced. Demands softened. Eventually, it became negotiation instead of confrontation. She didn't win anything, but she didn't leave empty-handed either. People like her rarely do. That didn't bother me, because what she wanted most, control, was the one thing she couldn't take. And more importantly, she never understood what she was trying to control in the first place. I heard about her once, weeks later. Not directly. Through someone who mentioned seeing her working again. Not in a position of power. Not even close. Starting over. Properly this time.
There was a certain balance in that.
Not punishment. Just consequence. And consequences don't need commentary. The anniversary approached quietly. 40 years since the first place opened. A number that felt heavier now than it ever had before. Daniel should have been there. That absence didn't fade. It settled. Became part of the structure. Like everything else. We prepared for it carefully. Not as a celebration of success, but as recognition of endurance. The menu was simple. Intentional. Each dish tied to a moment from the past. Not recreated. Refined. That distinction mattered. On the day itself, the restaurant filled early. Not with new faces. With familiar ones. People who had been coming for years. Decades. The kind of customers who don't just visit, they belong. I walked through the room slowly, greeting them, listening, remembering. At one table, a couple stood up as I approached. We came here on our first date, the woman said. 30 years ago, the man added. And you came back, I said. Every year, she smiled. That was it. That was everything. Not reviews. Not expansion. Not recognition. This.
Continuity.
Connection. Meaning. That's what Clara never saw. Because you can't measure it on a balance sheet. In the kitchen, Thomas was leading. Not commanding. Leading. There's a difference. The staff responded to him naturally now. Not because he was the owner's son, but because he had earned his place beside them. Marcel caught my eye as I stepped in. He gave a small nod. Approval. From him, that meant everything. I moved to the side, watching. Not intervening. Not directing. Just observing. That was new for me. Letting go even slightly. But it felt right. When the final dish of the night went out, Thomas exhaled, running a hand through his hair, just like Daniel used to do. For a second, the resemblance hit me harder than I expected. Not just in appearance. In presence. In timing. In understanding. Later, after the last guests had left and the lights dimmed, I found myself alone in the dining room. The same place where everything had begun. The same place where everything had nearly ended. I walked slowly to the wall near the entrance. The photographs were still there. Years of moments captured in frames. Daniel smiling in most of them. Of course he was. I added one more earlier that day. Thomas. In his chef's coat. Focused. Present. Not posing. Becoming. I stood there for a long moment, studying it. Then I picked up a glass from one of the tables and raised it slightly. To what remains, I said quietly. Not to what was lost. Not to what almost disappeared. But to what endured. Because in the end, that's the only thing that matters. Not who tried to take it. Not who misunderstood it. But who stayed. Who built. Who protected. And who learned how to carry it forward. I placed the glass back down, turned off the final light, and walked toward the exit. Tomorrow would come. It always does. And when it did, the doors would open again. The kitchen would come alive. The work would continue. Not because it had to, but because it deserved to. And this time, there would be no question. Not about the past. Not about the future. And not about who this place truly belonged to. It had always been mine. And one day, when the time was right, it would be his.